Hi, everyone. Welcome to the seminar series that includes the career counseling sessions with both our fellows, and we always invite someone into the mix that we think has knowledge or experience or I guess really a perspective to share that is broad enough that not just one fellow, but many fellows can benefit from it. And we're really excited today to have Pranay for that with us. And he's zooming in from the UK. I'm assuming that you're there right now from ARIA, and many of you guys, I think, could really benefit from this just because you're in the UK, but also those of you who are not, there's definitely some opportunities as well here to learn from Pranay's career path, but then also possibly some opportunities that are a little bit more broader fetched. Okay, so maybe we'll start with brief introductions. I'll just go round by the list of people that I see. Perhaps we could start with Angad. If you want to say name, affiliation, and one keyword, that would be awesome.
Yeah, at Queen Mary University and space stations.
Cool. Next one, we have Chiara. Chiara, please say your name, affiliation, and one keyword of what you're working on.
Great. So my name's Chiara. I'm with King College London, and I work on epigenetics.
Wonderful. Next, we have Dean.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dean Thomas. I'm a research fellow at the University of Glasgow, and I work in automation.
Super. Then we have Yannicka.
Everyone, yeah, I'm Yannicka. I work at Sentinel Bio on pandemic preparedness and biosecurity.
We have Marielle.
Powerhouse Biology. I work on mitochondrial engineering.
Very cool. Matt Alcock.
Hi, yeah, Matt Alcock. Currently work at Starium, which is a space sector company, but I'm in my final week, so soon to be unattached.
Unattached, untethered.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you want to say something else?
Just that I work on space weather.
Very cool. Okay, did we miss anyone? No. Okay, cool. Then you have at least a little bit of context on who's here. There will probably be a few more fellows joining late. Maybe we'll do introductions, but maybe I'll just try to make relevant what you say in their context as well. But maybe to kick it off with you now, Pranay, thanks a lot for joining. It was really wonderful to actually have you in SF and to actually properly meet you last year. I think you and ARIA in general have been, I think, a beacon of hope over the past few years, really now, since its inception, and really driving a new approach to scientific innovation and change, and really making sure that projects that are opportunities that are too big to miss don't get dropped, and that the government is behind really funneling and supporting scientific innovation. So thanks a lot for all the work that you've been doing there. You've also had a really interesting career path that I think many fellows can learn from, that has almost led you to where you currently are at ARIA. And so we want to dig into both of these. So maybe we'll start with your career path first, because you are not only at ARIA now, but before that, you were in various other venues that are quite important for the Foresight community, including you were a fellow, I think, at the On-Deck Longevity Biotech Fellowship. You were then at Polaris, you were at Nucleate, and now you're at ARIA. So there's lots of venues in there that Foresight fellows know probably. So could you walk us a little bit through your career path and which of these points were the most impactful for getting you where you currently are?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, and it's awesome to be here and really exciting to hear a lot of the fellows' work and to hear so many of them are in the UK. But yeah, obviously we're super aligned to Foresight as well. It's been really exciting kind of building this out over the last few months and seeing where it goes. So yeah, to think about career journey and how I've ended up where I am now at ARIA, just to preface, I will present something that sounds somewhat linear, so it makes some degree of sense to everyone. But crucially, it's been pretty much very non-linear. There's so many moments of chance, luck. And one thing I've learned is I can frame a story in a nice way depending on who the audience is and whether it's how I'm trying to say how I got into science or meta science or whatever else. So I'll present the broadest version here, as I suspect everyone's interested in both of those areas. But I do want to share that the most important part I consider of my journey is how relatively unplanned and non-linear it's been. And I've never really had a long-term plan. So we can go into that a bit more as well. But I guess it started out, I did biochemistry first, and I really enjoyed science and experimentation. But towards the end of my biochemistry degree, I saw extremely smart, intelligent people wanting to leave science because of salaries and time to impact and the way ambition is socialized in certain institutions. And that's when I got deeply interested in the talent allocation problem, which is basically around what do the world's smartest and most talented people, like pretty much everyone here, what do they do with their lives? And it's crazy to say now, but at the time, science entrepreneurship wasn't a big thing in Oxford. This was about 2017, 18. And I really saw this as a way of addressing the reasons why many scientists were leaving technical fields. So I was really interested in this, but I also really cared about science and the deeply technical space. And I really saw this as a massive gap in the entrepreneurial world, actually, just the level of technical expertise people have. So I decided to go pursue a PhD, and actually, like Chiara, it was in sort of epigenetics, a lot of it in the germline, DNA damage, but yeah, quite linked there. And the purpose of that was really just to learn, how do we obtain knowledge? How do we know what we know? How do we learn things through experimentation, and what do experiments tell us? And at the time, I thought this was because I wanted to go into kind of diligencing and sourcing and really identifying new novel technologies. So I started my PhD at the LMB in Cambridge, and I was just like extremely fortunate to have this environment where I just got to do whatever I want. Just like the level of intellectual freedom was so liberating, so exciting. Lucky to have a group leader environment and institution that really let me pursue the directions I wanted to go in. And yeah, I did extremely unbounded research in science that was fun, but alongside it, worked for a lot of entrepreneurial organizations, some of which you named there, things like Nucleate, and helping set up the Polaris Fellowship over in Cambridge. And yeah, over time, I think like at the end of my PhD, came across a second wave of the talent allocation problem, where a lot of people doing these technical PhDs were just like, I don't want to stay in academia. I don't really know where else to go. And so I'm just going to leave science. So yeah, got really interested in that again and reinvigorated that. And that fed into these decisions on Polaris and Nucleate and pieces as well. And around that time, ARIA was set up. So we had our second birthday last month, which was fun. And yeah, ARIA was set up, and they really have this bold, innovative approach to how to fund science and what to look for. And I think when I met the team, and what really resonated was, we're setting up an experiment. So we're not trying to do things that I've done before, and we're not just trying to write reports and be a think tank. Actually, that's the first 5% of what we want to do. We actually want to go and do the thing and test it out in the real world. And that really resonated with me and what I found to be most exciting. So yeah, joined ARIA about a year ago now, and working there in leading all of ARIA's new products and experimentation, which I can talk a bit more about, but a focus on talent, community, science entrepreneurship, and all these exciting things.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig into the ARIA's programs and then like your work in particular there as well. But if we just stay on your life journey for a second, because I'm assuming that that's also relevant for many of our fellows here, because I'm sure that many of them share your, perhaps at least, could one call it disillusionment, or at least like your concern about like, why are so many talented people considering leaving academia or considering leaving science altogether for other jobs? And on your path, are there specific things that you learned either perhaps from OnDeck or from Polaris or from Nucleate? What do these career like stations mean to you? Like, would you recommend anyone else going through these programs, or has anyone in particular really shaped your or accelerated you to doing the work that you currently do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the person I'd put most of this kind of career trajectory and shaping down to is Matt Clifford, who founded Entrepreneur First, and he's the chair of ARIA. And he was someone I hosted back in 2016, 17, when I was trying to validate entrepreneurship as a career path. And EF was the organization he founded, which is all about the sort of talent allocation problem, was founded on the premise that if you can get really talented people together, you'll have massively outsized impact and outcomes. And he did a lot of amazing writing, which he's unfortunately stopped since he took on a lot of work. But his newsletter was called Thoughts in Between, and I think the archive is online. And I really recommend people to go check it out. The influence he had on me was, I'd say, as like an intellectual sparring partner, in the sense of his kind of newsletter was this little niche part of the internet, or just like the community I had at the time, where things were really thought about that a lot of people weren't thinking about. So again, crazy to say, but around that time in the UK as well, especially, like people were not massively thinking about how do you restructure science? What do organizations look like? How do you run these kind of experiments? And Matt was deeply thinking about this kind of work, and also thinking a lot about talent and what do the world's best talent do with their lives? How do you fund this? And how do you run experiments in that as well? And so I think one thing I really learned through all these journeys, and alluding to your question, should people go through these programs? One thing that I've always like really been drawn to and excited by, and advice I give a lot of people is it's like incredibly valuable to just go set things up, and set things up based on like your thesis and view of the world, not what necessarily the people around you are doing. And It's true that ambition and talent are extremely social, and it's about the people around you. And it's really important to have the right people around you, for example, in this fellowship. But I think what I've always found really valuable in things like going to set up Polaris, helping set up Nucleate, and going to the really early days of ARIA is actually a lot of people will go into these movements and programs and fellowships and things a long time after they've been set up and once their credibility's been built. But what I've always found really exciting is what does it mean to be there at the start, and how do you go set these things up from day one? And I think to go find signals amongst a lot of noise in these areas, it requires, I had Matt's newsletter. People should go explore what's out there and really finding kind of thinkers and thought leaders in spaces and seeing what ticks with you, and try and join dots between like disparate areas and the way in which you join the dots and what you find exciting. There'll be people writing about it, speaking about it on podcasts, and doubling down on those areas. So yeah, I'd say that's what I've generally followed.
I was going to ask you how you found out about all these opportunities, but that newsletter sounds really amazing. I posted it here in the chat. I didn't even know that it existed, but it sounds awesome. And I guess Matt is also doing really fantastic work now on the DevAct front with Entrepreneur First, etc. Like, it's just been like all over the place, I feel like.
Right.
Yeah, I hear you. Like, Foresight is nearing its 40th anniversary, and I sometimes wonder what it would have been like to be there at its first or second birthday, right at the beginning. That must have been really exciting. But yeah, and eventually ARIA will probably have 40, 50 anniversaries behind it. So it's gonna be exciting to think about. Okay, could we talk maybe for those of you, maybe can I have a show of hands who here doesn't know what ARIA is doing, or who here has never heard of ARIA? And it's totally fine to raise your hand, because then I will ask Pranay to go into depth. Okay, seems like people have a bit of context. For those who might not, who might be watching this afterwards, do you mind giving a little bit of an overview of what is ARIA actually all about, and what kind of programs do you have kicking right now?
Yeah, so ARIA was, maybe a lot of people know, but broadly set up to plug a gap in kind of the UK and I guess European funding ecosystem, which is there were no real funders of extremely bold, ambitious, high-risk research, which is just most likely going to fail. But if any of those shots on goal do succeed, they can have immense societal impact. And in order to plug this gap and address this problem, a few special advisors in government decided to look at the early days of DARPA and the bits they pulled out of that. And so we say we're founded on the myth of DARPA, but no longer actually how it works or operates. And it was remove decision by panel. So don't have huge panels doing lots of grant reviews. Actually, let's have incredibly creative scientists, technologists, researchers with a great background and get them to make the decisions and let them lead the way. And yeah, we were set up on that premise of how do we do that, and passed through a bill in Parliament that basically says, we're setting up this new funding agency. They have extreme freedom. They can take equity. They can not take equity. They can bring in private funding. They can not bring in private funding. They can do this, that, the other, and extremely few guardrails and constraints. And so our founding team had a lot of onus on them to set up in the right way with all the freedoms. But we really arrived at the key premise is wanting to fund stuff that no one else will fund. So we really want to be different. And I think a key part of ARIA is we're not trying to replace other funding agencies. We're not trying to tell other people how to do their funding. We're really here to plug a gap that exists, and mostly a gap for talent. What our CEO always says is when you try and found a startup, your biggest bet is that it's the right time to create that startup. And actually for ARIA, it's the same thing. Most of us in ARIA right now, in fact, all of us, basically joined because it was the right time to join ARIA. The UK talent pool is doing like just exceptional at the moment. There's so much momentum around these kind of initiatives. And so I think 10 years ago would have been the wrong time. In 10 years, it might also have been the wrong time, but it really is an opportune moment to set up something like this. And we have a massive people over projects motto, which is we fundamentally care about people and what they're going to do. And so a lot of our initiatives, from how we select our program directors to what they work on and who they fund, is really based on how are we finding the best talent, both in the UK and around the world. And so what happens is we have these awesome scientists that come in. Are they limited to UK? No, they're not. And so, we have program directors come in and they decide on a vision of science they think is just severely underserved, but could have massive impact around the world. And they get to direct around 30 to 100 million pounds to it over 3 to 5 years, and they'll build up a portfolio of projects. And they'll work with them really closely, the researchers, startups, academia, industry, individuals. Someone was a postdoc at Cambridge here, and he actually used our funding to buy himself out of the postdoc and just set up in a garage. And he now is just a completely independent researcher, and he's working outside of academia. Yeah, we really fund across the whole range. And we also deeply care about the translation of the work. So the actual breakthrough and the discovery, we consider like a very early step in our journey. Like, it's amazing if that happens, but if that breakthrough sits in a paper or a freezer, we consider ourselves to have not done the work we've been created to do. We really want to create societal impact. And so the translation of the work is a big part of what I'm focused on.
Awesome. I think the 3 programs that at least like I'm aware of, one, the really one focused on technical AI safety that's led by Davidad, who's also like a dear friend / like hero of our community. Then there's the programmable plans program that I know not all that much about. And then the recent one, the scalable neural interfaces one with Jack Carolan. And I think all 3 are just like really like spot on in terms of what could move the needle right now. So could you, share a little bit more info? Like, how is it that you come up with new, like what decides how you come up with new projects? Is it just you hire a program director and then they just make it up as they go? And if so, what makes a good program director? Those are all like really, I think, interesting and quite needle moving projects, because each different program has quite a lot of money behind it.
Yes. So the way we bring in our program directors, or program managers, as they're called in the ARPA agencies, is they start in cohorts. So we had 8 start in October 2023 and 8 starting in April. And actually some of our new spaces are very closely linked to a couple of what the fellows are working on. So definitely keep your eyes out for that, which will be cool. And they start in cohorts of roughly around 8 to 9 program directors. And we choose them based on things like their ambition, creativity, and importantly, their kind of track record. We really care about people who think differently and can evidence that. Have you changed fields and made breakthroughs in multiple fields, for example? But also industries and sectors. Have you worked not just in necessarily one setting, but you've done R&D across a different range of settings? And we really value that and consider that extremely important, because we want to fund research in different types of settings. So we go through the selection process. We went global this year and did a searching process. So we did a big roadshows in the US, Europe, and obviously the UK, and hopefully going even wider next time. And these program directors come in, and some of them have the idea that they know they want to work on. This is their life's work. And like Davidad is one of these. He knew exactly what he wanted to work on and came in and he's just, this is it. This is what I'm doing. And we probe. We go, is this the most ambitious thing you could do? Is this really underserved? And can you change the conversation with 50 to 100 million pounds? He'd put so much thinking behind it. And he's definitely one of the world's best people to work on this, that it was a no-brainer. But for some of our other program directors in our first cohort, what actually happened is they came in and they applied for one area that they thought they want to work in. And they come in and they interact with the community that ARIA has, both our advisors, but also organizations around the world. And they speak to them, and some of them completely flipped out of what they proposed and just went, actually, I could be working on something way more ambitious than this. And the question they literally get asked the most by our CEO, is this really the most ambitious thing you could be working on? And some of them, what they applied to and what they're working on now are completely unrecognizable. And so we give them a lot of freedom to change areas that they work in and explore new areas. We find that really exciting and valuable, and basically staying to this people over projects. And so our selection is really, we do look at what program directors propose as a sign of the scale of ambition and their creativity. But actually, we also think you could come in and work on something else like the first day. And so we really actually look more at how do you think and what do you care about? How do you want to have impact, and how do you think about scaling that impact? And so, we also think the biggest white space is between fields. So a lot of our program directors are exploring the intersection of 2 different fields. And so actually, Jacques is, I think, a quantum physicist by training and now doing a neuroscience program. And we've got physicists doing robotics programs, which is a bit closer. Angie is exploring kind of synthetic biology and plants, which are 2 fields that really don't talk to each other basically at all. And so she's bringing those 2 fields closer. So we think like the Venn diagram overlaps between traditionally distant fields is where a lot of value is, both societally and financially.
It's always so interesting because people always, they say that, but then actually driving innovation at these wide spaces or at the intersection of these fields is so hard, because it's so difficult to connect these different languages to each other, the different working styles, different metrics, etc. It's really tough. But I think ultimately that's definitely where some of the gold lies, at least. Maybe one more question on the programs, and then I want to hand it over to Matt, because you've asked a few questions that are quite relevant for this part of the discussion. We've talked a little bit about the program director, but if people want to apply to the programs, what are you looking for in an applicant? Like who's eligible to apply to maybe some of the seed funding or some of the larger programs? How does that work?
Yes. So we have 2 forms of funding, and one of them is just our straight program funding. And so these are where a program director has come up with this really focused vision, and they will direct, 30 to 100 million pounds over 3 to 5 years. And that funding normally is in the 2 to 20 million pound range. It's often for consortiums or collaborations, but also startups, industry, academia across that range. And that is quite high touch. It's all milestone based, and we have regular check-ins with the scientists, and there's a lot of feedback and touch points. There's a community built with all the other people being funded on that program, and everyone's really working towards a shared vision and goal. And that's like a narrower vision. And so that's what we call our program funding. When we were building out ARIA, we realized we were coming across just some absolutely exceptional people who had these really speculative, even more blue sky ideas than what we're funding in our programs, but they fell out of scope of the program. And we realized a small amount of funding could be extremely catalytic for a lot of these people. And so in about a 5-week sprint, we designed a completely new funding mechanism called our seed funding, which is modeled on kind of Patrick and Tyler's fast grants mechanism. And so these are 10,000 to 500,000 pound seed funding, and they're really light touch. I think it's a 3-page application, and the funding decision's in 4 to 6 weeks at the moment. And we give this again to everyone from individuals to industry, and very light touch, up to 3 years. And we just say, if you're not in the program, but just adjacent to it, and you have a really speculative idea, bold, ambitious, and you really can't get it funded by anyone else, but you think it's in the right flavor and the right spirit, then come and apply for these kind of seed calls. What we can fund globally, as I said at the start, I think basically what we care about is, are you the best, or if not the best, one of the best people to work on this area? And we can fund you basically anywhere to do that. And just really convincing us that the idea wouldn't be funded by other people. As kind of proof points, we've had some amazing applicants and scientists apply, and our program directors have gone, I think this could be funded by VC, and we think this is commercial enough and close enough to their world. And about 3 days after our decisions, like, some of these companies have announced massive seed rounds, which to us is like a really good validation point. So I think for us, it is important that that funding is going to a place which wouldn't have received funding from anywhere else, and really being catalytic.
That's so interesting, because that really ties in with the question that Matt just asked in the chat. So Matt, do you want to ask maybe one or both of your questions?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll start with the one that's most relevant. Yeah, so you opened up talking about ARIA as if it exists to plug a gap in funding of these like maximally ambitious attempts outside of the traditional regions of scientific funding. So my question was, to what extent this approach is different to the existing VC funding that already exists to fund low probability, high impact bets? And I asked it a little bit, what's the word? I'm very pro what ARIA does. I'm just trying to
of course,
nudge a little bit to see what your answer is.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think there's 2 examples I can give here. One is, one of our programs is on AI hardware, which is basically, that field is outside academia, predominantly industry and startups. And when the program director goes to speak to startups and goes, he actually comes from a startup background, Suraj. And when he goes to speak to startups working on areas he thought are linked to his program, it turns out you speak to these incredibly ambitious young scientists who have set up these startups that want to revolutionize how we make AI hardware. And the one thing they all say is, our investors want their return, and so they're pushing us down routes that are already commercially viable and actually not what we set up to do the company at all. And most of our IP is going to waste. And they often lose great talent because that talent wants to work on what the company was set up to do, not what the investors are trying to push them on really quick returns. And so one thing is, we actually fund teams within startups, and often we fund startups because they will have a sub-team or projects within their companies that are way more ambitious than what the VC investors will let them do, and especially on the timelines in which they want to see returns. So that's one kind of touch point in fields in which there is a lot of VC activity. The other one is, we also want to fund areas where there is no VC activity because they can't really see returns. So one of those is, we have a project called kind of future-proofing our climate and weather, and it's about things like cloud seeding, making ice sheets brighter. And we think actually this is not something we really want to be in private funding or in private hands. These are technologies that should be public and looked over by governments, nonprofits, and benefactory organizations. And so there we really want to fund these kind of technologies, but leave them out for public good and open source and not private. The other one is our synthetic biology for plants program. VCs are really not going anywhere near this because it's just completely undeveloped, and actually massive, like big ag just has all the techniques, all the IP, doesn't share any of it. once we placed our bet of about 60 to 70 million on this area, 2 or 3 European VC firms have released theses because we've actually said, okay, we will dedicate money to lifting this field up and de-risking some of the areas. And so VCs get interested. But initially, there was no kind of private VC activity in that area.
Great, thank you. I'll leave my other question because it wasn't actually related to ARIA, because this is some of the ones, but I'll maybe sneak in there with the second one that's just come to my mind. So it's similar, following on from this. Somehow the UK government has been convinced that this is a good bet. I think it's a good bet, but the UK government doesn't usually fund this kind of stuff. So like, what's in it for them? What do they see as the value here? Because I know that my partner works in the civil service, and she is often having to justify every kind of penny or £1,000 spent because it's taxpayers' money. What's different about this?
What's different about ARIA? I think it's when it was pitched and put through government, and it was really based off evidence, historical models, that these kind of innovation models have previously worked and driven a lot of impact. And on the flip side, that our current models aren't working. And actually, if you look at big breakthrough, groundbreaking discoveries, they're not really coming through our traditional funding models and the research councils that existed in the UK. And so when ARIA was set up, actually the budget we got is relatively a drop in the ocean compared to any other sort of funding agency. And it was really pitched as, let's run this experiment. There's a lot of data supporting that it should work. And let's say, give it a 5-year budget. And if it doesn't work, fine. But that kind of mixture of using the historical examples on top of the current state and system isn't working, so it's worth running an experiment. And actually, this is, relative to R&D funding, a very cheap experiment for the impacts that could come out of it.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
I really hope you inspire lots more programs like it. And Raka next.
Hey, Pranay. My name's Raka. I'm a PhD from Yale studying aging. So my question is going to be relevant to that context. My question is, does ARIA have plans to expand into longevity science and preventative healthcare? And I understand that ARIA tends to focus on spaces that are typically less funded by VCs, but I think there is a scope for like specifically preventative healthcare, which is, given NHS being overburdened, and the huge scope for a lot of other spaces, which is not just like longevity science, but just generally preventative healthcare. I wonder if there's scope for ARIAs investing in this space.
Yeah, so the way we think about scoping out specific areas is we try and think often, what are strategic areas that are strategic for the UK and that ARIA could work in and fund? But we very rarely have this top-down approach of, these are the areas we are excited in. We will have a program in this. What we instead do is we put out something called like a request for opportunities this year, modeled on YC's request for startups. And that's to signal the scale of ambition and where we think there might be some gaps. But really our model is, if people think there is an underserved area where ARIA funding could really change the conversation globally, then apply to our program director cohorts. And if you convince us that is the area in which funding should go, then we will take you on. But we really have that model of, let's see the talent come in and apply to a space and convince us, rather than this more top-down approach led by areas itself. So I'd say we don't have plans actually for any area, but we are very open to areas like this. And yeah.
That makes sense. Thanks.
You might have to switch horses, Raka, and apply.
Sure. Maybe.
Next one up, we have Yannicka.
Yeah, I have a question about the difference to US ARPAs, because I know there's like many different ones, like ARPA-H and ARPA, of course, and ARPA-I. And I guess one like obvious difference is that you are like one agency doing many different things, which of course, yeah, is good for like cross-domain innovation and knowledge sharing. But do you also see any downsides of not having multiple specialized ARPAs? And if yes, what's the most important one, and how does that maybe influence the way that ARIA operates?
Yes, the key difference is that we're not themed or focused, and that we have this kind of agency to explore any area that we want. And actually when we can do defense if we want, for example. We've chosen not to right now, but there might be future areas in that. And I think part of that stems from, this is the first of its kind. Like for ages, there was only one ARPA in the States as well. And then once the model worked, there were more and more. And so we are really only 2 years old. There might be Daria in 3 years. But actually, I think there's a lot of advantages in that you see our program directors from all these different areas talking, giving ideas to each other, seeding ideas in each other's spaces. and especially when we're exploring these Venn diagram overlap areas. And so that's extremely valuable. If there's a downside, I guess it would be that we are trying to nucleate community around us in all these areas simultaneously. Whereas if you are called ARIA for human health, like the human health community would naturally come to you. So I think like that, it just gives us a bigger activation energy to build all of this community around us. And so we do tell program directors and we name our opportunity spaces to have ownership and let the scientists feel ownership within that so that they can build community around them. But yeah, I'd say that's probably the harder part of having it all in one.
Maybe I'll chime in with a question here, and if anyone else wants to ask one, just raise your hand or drop it in the chat if you can't unmute. But I think a few months ago, you've launched this like other program now, or like this expansionary program, but just this really like activation program where you're collaborating with a bunch of other fantastic organizations like Convergence, like Pillar, like Nucleate, etc., to drive more general innovation in the UK. Could you perhaps share a little bit more about what that program's about, and if there might be more or others like it on the horizon?
Yeah, so this is our Activation Partners program, which I'm leading and managing, and it's been so much fun. So we, as I said at the start, we want to fund breakthroughs and we don't want them to sit in papers and freezers, which makes a lot of other agencies really happy. But we want to translate them into the real world. And we had two options for this in the sort of early days of ARIA, which was we could build the in-house functions to do all of this work, TTOs, licensing offices, incubators, accelerators, but ARIA really wants to stay smaller and a nimble team. And then there's also incredible organizations with track records of translating research into the real world, whether through nonprofit means, through for-profit, and through philanthropy, and things like this. And so what we put out this basically 2-page call that said, if you care about getting research into the real world, just come and talk to us. And there was maybe silence for about 2 days, and then we were absolutely inundated. And that was really exciting because a key part of that call was we said to all these organizations, we don't want to fund anyone's business as usual in a very ARIA way. We said, if in doing your normal work, you've got ideas of new programs you can run to activate talent, activate science, activate R&D, but you can't get funding from anyone else to do it, either through LPs or government funders, like we want to work with you on these types of programs that really no one else is working on. And so after a few months of kind of selection and interviews and speaking to so many awesome organizations, we selected our 9 partners. And our key focus for this is we wanted to serve different stages of kind of the innovation pipeline. The biggest focus we have is on early stage talent. Like, how do you activate scientists who are ambitious to think even more boldly about their work and how they get it into the real world? And so a lot of the activities we're working with these partners on is there. And I will run through who the partners are and what they're doing. But another piece was that, like I was saying to Matt, all our programs have very different outcomes in terms of how they have impact. So some of them will be for-profit, some of them will be non-profit, some of them will be public good, and some of them we have no idea what translation out of these spaces looks like. So we wanted to cover the whole range of outputs as well. And so our partners reflect this. We have really early talent building, community building ones, for example, Nucleate, who are working with us on building community around climate, a biotech for the climate, which is massively underserved. There's Homeworld Bio out in the States, which Daniel Goodwin's doing just like excellent work, but in the UK, there's really not a community for this. And for our programmable plants, we think even if all the technical milestones fail and we don't do any science in this program, if you can get people working on synthetic biology for plants to finish their PhDs and go, I want to spin this out into a company, we think that's a win for ARIA and the broader ecosystem. So we're really working with Nucleate to catalyze that translational entrepreneurial mindset within that field. We've then also got Renaissance Philanthropy, which obviously we're super excited about and very close to you guys as well. So working with Tom and the UK team to bring philanthropic capital to the UK. So this is really not a big thing here, and for various reasons, but they're really passionate about how do you set agendas. And I think ARIA is effectively an agenda setter. We have these programs and opportunity spaces, which we think are highly impactful. And so how do you communicate these to philanthropists and say, these are areas in which you should donate your wealth? And so we're working with them to bring that to the UK, and not just to fund kind of our programs, but also to fund early stage talent. And how can we say to really ambitious scientists, like, here's a spending pot for 1 year, just go do stuff, go like host events, go host workshops, go do some experiments, and really trying to bring that to the UK as well. So we're really excited about that. Another exciting one, Convergent, of course. I think we're the first public body to fund Convergent and do a really open call solicitation with them. So their call in the UK is open now, and we'll be launching their first ever UK FROs, which we're so excited for, and they'll be in ARIA's opportunity spaces. Pillar launched their AI for Science Fellowship. So we think there's a massive gap in our opportunity spaces where there's not enough AI talent. And so they are launching a 12-month fellowship to get top-tier AI researchers to stop building chatbots and start making scientific progress and breakthroughs. And so we're really excited to be working with them on that. And they're going to be, doing these 12-month fellowships for that. So that's the flavor of it. Cambridge University is actually the last one I'll speak about, which is getting neurotech ideas into the real world is extremely difficult because you need to bring together academics, you need to bring together entrepreneurs and clinicians. And those three getting to talk in one sort of highly dense environment is extremely rare. There are a few places in the world that have it, many in the States, but Cambridge is really one of these where their clinician and clinical ecosystem is just phenomenal. They have great entrepreneurs, but also great academic science. So they're launching fellowships as well called like What If and Blue Sky Fellowships, where for 12 months, they're just going to give accommodation in some of Cambridge's colleges, lab space, entrepreneurial mentors, clinical mentors. And if you either just got a wild idea in neuroscience that you've not even done the experiments for, but you think could be really cool, they'll give you funding and lab space to pursue that. Or if you have proof of concept and you want to scale out your neurotech ideas, they've got a program for that as well. So yeah, that's the things we're doing with our activation partners. And it's been really exciting to see them come to life.
That's awesome. And I guess I just shared the link to the activation partners page on ARIA here. If people want to find out more, is that the best place for them to do so? Or I didn't even know that Pillar now has an AI for Science focused one. That's amazing.
Yeah, we're so excited. And Tony Pillar's been driving that and he's so thoughtful about this. And so having him on board, helping us out with that and really building this fellowship is awesome. And I think it really shows what kind of change you can catalyze if you just tell people like, we will fund things that you can't fund, that you can't get funding for, but just come to us. And yeah, that's something they couldn't get funding for, but we're like, okay, let's run the experiment and see what happens. So yeah, that's the right place. If you sign up for updates as well, our Substack every kind of month is going to have what our partners are doing in the next month. And loads of them are doing public sort of community building events. They're going to be launching open calls to be part of their programs, to be part of their communities. So yeah, signing up on our website there for updates is a great place to stay updated as well.
Yeah, and loads of them also have legs all over the world, including the US. It's definitely relevant for folks that are in the UK and beyond. Like we've talked a lot about programs and nitty-gritty details, but if you zoom out for a moment, since you've perhaps done your PhD, embarked on this journey, and now with ARIA, just like kicking off so many new like meta science initiatives or like really initiatives to improve the pace and the quality of science and the translation of science being done, are there like, how do you see the talent pool or like the skill levels that people need to develop changing from when you've done a PhD to now? It seems like it's changing rather rapidly. Would you even still recommend people do a PhD? How do you see that entire ecosystem changing from a perspective perhaps of one of our fellows now really looking at different career paths and options?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And one, that comes up a lot. I think what I generally say is I think the skills are pretty much the same. And I think what I learned really early on was there's so many opportunities to build things now. There's an increasing entrepreneurial spirit around and so many funding opportunities for this. And it's really great to take advantage of it. And I think the activation partners and the change they're catalyzing in the UK ecosystem is huge. I think what I tell people mostly is to, like I was alluding to earlier, have a thesis of the world and your worldview and what you think needs to change and what's like underserved and what you're really passionate about. And don't really worry about the headline of the job, whether it's a PhD or a postdoc or founding, because you can, not all startups are right, but you might find the right one for you. And not all PhDs are right, but you might find the right PhD for you. And not all postdocs might be right, but you might find the perfect one for your career path and what you want to do. And so on the PhD example, there are plenty of PhDs I saw people go into and be like, that was probably never a great idea. And the other opportunities you have were probably much more impactful and valuable. But then I look at the ones I did and the ones in the LMB where the environment makes such a difference in the people around you and the skills you learn. And so I think like I very much try and restrict myself from ever saying, don't do this part unless I know the people really well, because what I think is what's most important is to not follow trends blindly, which is what I was trying to say at the start, and not just do stuff because it's what the people around you are doing, or don't do stuff because everyone around you is saying, don't do this, don't do a postdoc, don't do like consulting or whatever. It's mostly what I did and what I still really think people should do is just being really curious, going to read, and maybe this comes back to Matt's question about what's my now information diet, but just absorb from a wide range of people and thinkers, and Tony from Pillar is like really one of these. And just taking in all this information from all these diverse sources, just joining the dots by yourself and finding the thinkers that are most aligned to how you really join the dots and the thesis you form about the world, doubling down on them and finding the right communities and what they do. And then I think for me, like it was just a case of trying so many things and finding out what I really enjoy. And I really enjoy building things from like the start. And once they're built and running, I don't care and get bored. And want to go build the next thing. But that took a lot of trial and error. So my other big advice is like a lot of people try and find the perfect opportunity, even if it's alongside their PhD or alongside kind of their other full-time role. It's just really important to know what you enjoy. And actually, I think one really undervalued piece of advice I never got that I would think is it's more valuable to find out what you don't enjoy. So just go try things. And actually, if you go, I freaking hate this. I hate sitting at a desk. I hate working in a massive team. I hate working in a tiny team, whatever it is. Just really learning those things is so important. And that's how I figured out what I want to do at ARIA. And now I constantly get asked, like, what do you want to do? What do you want your role to be? How do you want to spend your time? And having like really good answers to that gets obviously increasingly valuable as you work through your career trajectory. So the earlier you can figure that stuff out, definitely the better. I also think don't just bank skills because LinkedIn asks you what your top 5 skills are and you haven't filled in your profile yet. I think like skill banking is something a lot of people think is important, but actually it's more about finding your passions and your theses. And so for me, it was just like, I really like building. And so with Polaris, with Nucleate, now at ARIA, just like constantly getting to spin things up from the ground up and seeing the impact they have. But yeah, just doing whatever you feel is right for your worldview and the impact you want to have. I think there's so many different flavors within jobs and PhDs and career paths that everyone can find the right one for them within that. It's about the people around you and the institution in which you do that. And that's taste-based. And the way you build that taste is by doing a lot of things and experimenting and learning.
Yeah, the trial and error method is, I think, really quite valuable, but also so painful. And also then you also have to then have the courage to actually stop doing what you don't like doing. And that's really difficult, especially if it's like on paper a great opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Matt, your question.
Yeah, thank you. So you have been swimming in the waters with people who are very ambitious, and you'll probably have seen some people, perhaps including yourself, be very successful with that. But you've probably also seen others find the weight of ambition and bold new kind of ventures, stepping away from the norm. But for some people, it's a big weight to bear, and maybe they pack too much in their rucksack and it's a bit too much for them at the time. And then they burn out and things like this. And that's me over the last like few years. And one of the like mantras or mottos or something that I have in my kind of next phase of work after I finish this week into whatever will come next. It's something like sustainable ambition. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like yet for me. I haven't really found that. From what you've seen and who you've spoken to in all of your work, do you have any kind of words of wisdom about what sustainable ambition might look like? Have you seen some people manifest that in a really admirable way?
Yeah, I think I've been around so many people who've burnt out, so many through PhD and through all these organizations. And I think like the thing that's almost consistent amongst a lot of them, I won't say all, but a lot, is people who really pursue a lot of sort of side gigs or jobs because they think that's what they should be doing because it's trendy or it's in the zeitgeist or that's what everyone else around them's doing. And that's what their environment maybe is. And so really in my PhD, basically, like as an example to anchor this, there were some people who were just absolutely exceptional, phenomenal, and got given all the resources, like in the place you get given all the resources. And so some people take so much advantage of it and go and just kill it 14 hours a day, every day, and just pump out extremely exciting breakthroughs. But it means for people who don't want to pursue that kind of path or that kind of career trajectory within academia, or just really don't want to have that kind of ambition, when they see that, they think, oh, I should be doing that. And so try and match those hours and try and reach those. And then they really burn out when the other person actually doesn't. And on the flip side, then in the PhD, there's people who didn't burn out, but also didn't want that kind of career path. They found whatever they wanted to do outside of that. And so for me, it was things like ODLB, Nucleate, setting up Polaris. And so you could end up spending the same amount of time actually as the person who's in the lab all day, every day, doing your projects and your side work. But without having that pressure of you're doing it because you think that's what you should be doing rather than, oh, this is like what I really care about and want to do. I think that's one way in which I've seen people have like burnouts on one side, but then sustainable ambition on the other side, which is just that constantly driven by that feeling that this is what I want to be doing and this is my worldview. And even if no one else is doing it, doesn't matter. I think this is impactful. And I think what I've seen a lot of.
Awesome. And Dean.
Hi, Pranay. A bit of a cheeky question, really. Where would you see yourself in 5 to 10 years, and what would you consider success from those 5 to 10 years be?
I have absolutely no idea. So the story I give to this is ARIA did not exist until 2 months before I submitted my PhD thesis. So if anyone asked me what you're going to do at the end of your PhD in up to 3 months and 3 years and 4 months in, I would have not been able to say the thing I ended up doing, which is now just absolutely incredible. And so, I just always anchor myself to that, and so in 5 or 10 years, absolutely no idea. I think I want to stay really close to really deeply technical organizations and people and science and very frontier science. I think strategy and building stuff, whether that's organizations, communities and things, and community and talent, I think being anchored around people and them being the source of kind of creativity and innovation is really close to me. So those 3 things I know are important. What that looks like, no idea.
Boris, thanks very much.
I want to maybe go back to one of the questions that we talked a little bit about with the information diet, but perhaps a bit more broader. What is it really, how can you find out about all of the, basically, it seems like a pretty random, but very kind of concrete walk, nevertheless, in hindsight, looking backwards on your career of where you ended up, where you are right now, and a lot of pretty unique opportunities that are quite inaccessible for many people. Let's say if you want to get a head start, is it just following a bunch of Substacks? And if so, is it following one Substack, following the ones that Substack recommends, going to a bunch of meetups? So what are good ways to find out about them? Basically making your first steps into these ecosystems. And that's different for different places. So for example, San Francisco is extremely place-based. There's an event every night here. but that might look different for other places. Do you have any ideas because I think once you're on a roll and know about a few opportunities, then you get invited to more events, then you know about other Substacks, what other podcasts, what other accounts to follow on X. But the kind of first getting the kind of flywheel rolling is difficult. What ought one do?
Yeah, it's I wish I had a good answer to this. I think so. I'm actually going to start with the second piece, which is once you know about stuff, you'll know about more stuff, and why I actually have a counterexample to that, which is when Polaris was being set up, and by this point I was nearing the end of my PhD. I'd done a lot of Nucleate, ODLB, ARIA was on the cards, and helped a few people spin out their work from Cambridge, and was really deeply in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and people saw that. And so I was helping set up Polaris, and I said to a few of my closest friends who knew I'd been involved in a lot of this stuff, you should apply for this fellowship. It's really cool. You're going to get £10,000 to do whatever you want to do. This is incredible. And I'm helping it set it up. And literally some of these people I'm really close to were like, no, I think it's a scam. I'm not doing it. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah, I don't think it's legit. I'm not why would someone give me £10,000? And I was like, are you sure? And they were like, yeah. And then fine. And then the first cohort happened and it went exceptionally well. The talent pool that aggregates around Polaris Cambridge was just phenomenal. It became really well known in the ecosystem after 1 year. Great people around it. And so all these people who I told to apply in the first cohort decided to apply for the second cohort. And suddenly they only got £3,000 because the budget was constrained. And they were like, oh crap, maybe I should have done it. And I was like, I did tell you to do it. And I think this piece on I think there's a story in there somewhere of there is so much on what your taste and thesis and worldview says and how you judge things for yourself how you go judge things for yourself. And so I think in answer to the question of how you find these things out, a lot of when I look at these opportunities I got, most of them didn't come from really the people at the top of many organizations or anything like that. It came through being in a pub and just having an interesting conversation with a friend who would then introduce me to their friend. And we'd be like, oh yeah, you think similarly to this person. Why don't you chat to them? And really just getting along with, honestly, what I'd just call lay people, no one at the top of these organizations, and just really starting to develop what we thought about this person's latest Substack and what we thought about their thinking. And just building a really close group of friends around that. And then when they would find out about opportunities, they'd flag them to you. And so when I helped set up Polaris, it was actually Arno Schenk who set it up, just sent me a cold DM being like, oh, this person you've spoken to a few times, I know them, and they've recommended you should help me set this up. And I genuinely almost didn't reply. And a week later, I was just so bored. I was like, whatever, I'll reply to this person. And then we met up and got on really well and set up Polaris. But it didn't really come through anything too formal, structured, massively deliberate in terms of seeking the opportunities themselves. It's always been through seeking like-minded people and really trying to get on with them and expand ideas. I think, yeah, following people on Twitter. So like now, I know Matt, you asked, but like Century of Biology, Elliot Hirschberg, Asimov Press, Adam Marblestone, Ben Reinhardt, like all these people are great writers, and Daniel Goodwin, like all these people share great opportunities and things like that. So I'd say, yeah, following them, and they'll share opportunities, grants, funding mechanisms, but find your tribe and find your people, and things will exciting things will come up. This is like a great example of it. Who knows what's going to come out of this group soon.
I love that you're closing it off with make sure that you all connect with each other amongst your fellows.
Yeah.
It's easier said than done, I think. Okay, in the last minute, is there anything else I should have asked? Is there any final advice you want to give to fellows? Anything that might be on ARIA's horizon they should know about? Anything at all that you think we missed?
I say if you are going to Puerto Rico, find Muji from ARIA. He'll have a chat to you in person about all things ARIA. And yeah, we're releasing our next round of program directors in April, and they'll be public in March. I think there are some really good, I wish I could say what, but there'll be some really exciting overlaps with what some of the fellows here are working on and what you guys said at the start that your project areas are. But yeah, other than that, just like you guys, I'm sure are all killing it. And it's been so awesome. Thanks a lot for having me.
They
Thank
are
you.
killing it.
They really are. Not killing anything or anyone.
It.
Thank you so much. Thanks for
much.
your amazing questions. And thanks for spending some time with us. Really appreciate it.